Welcome to the fourth and final part, episode, whatever you want to call, of my State of the Collection as of January 2021. These are my kinds of odds and sods, the specials, the bits and pieces that don't really fit any other particular part of the collection. Hi, welcome back to Not So Obvious Watches. I'm Pete McConville, and this is, as I promised, the last time I will talk about my collection for a year or so. So this is, so far I've done three other parts of this sort of series. Part one was the rules of the game. Part two was looking at my vintage Alpinas. Part three was looking at my modern tool and travel watches. And this part four, is looking at the odds and sods, the other bits and pieces, watches that I own but don't fit any core collecting theme. These watches fall, like everything else, kind of fall into three subcategories. The first subcategory are watches I bought purely because I run a channel or because I'm in this hobby and I wanted to experiment with something. And I wanted to see what it was like so I could sort of talk about it from a channel point of view. The next group of watches are watches I own purely for fun. I saw them and on a whim chose to buy them to have a play and mess around with. And then the last group of watches are sentimental pieces which sometimes are watches I really love. Sometimes they're watches that are just, as I say, they're nothing but cheap memorabilia, and you'll pick out a couple of those towards the end of the video. Anyway, all of that said, there's a lot of watches to get through. Let's get into it right now. Okay, so let's get into the collection. Those watches which I've got just for the channel. The first is a Boulder Expedition. I bought this because I wanted to experience what a full lume dial was like. I'm kind of partial to Boulder as a brand. They're a micro brand I've enjoyed, and I quite like this watch. So it's a watch I like, but primarily I bought it as an experiment for a full lume dial. Along the same lines, I have a Glycine Combat sub 48mm diver. I bought this, and in particular I bought the 48mm because I wanted to experience a bronze watch, and a 48mm diver gives me the biggest possible canvas upon which you can experiment with patina and cleaning and all that sort of thing. It's a watch I do enjoy though, and you'll see it pop up on my Instagram feed a fair bit. But like the Boulder, it's primarily an experiment, as is the Vosstok komandurski. Vosstok are an incredibly cult followy, popular kind of brand, and I wanted to experience what that was like. I wanted to get a sense of what a brass as opposed to a bronze watch was like. The komandurski costs like $70. It's fun. I quite like the look of it, and it let me do that experiment. So here it is, and it's in my collection. Next, I wanted to experiment with some other kinds of hyped up internet featured, internet darling micro brands. There are none more in that category than Dan Henry. I do like compressor style divers, and so I got this Dan Henry, I think it's the 1972 diver. I'll have to check that. I'll put it up on the notes if I got it wrong. Diver. I do like this watch. I love the funky colors. Again, you'll see me wear it every now and then, but it was fundamentally, again, an experiment for me to see what it's like with one of these watches. And the final watch is this Panzera. Again, this is a local Australian micro brand. I wanted to experience an Australian micro brand and see what they were like. And these were on special on drop, I think it was, so they were going super cheap. I actually do like this watch. It's actually, I think it's quite a handsome watch. It's a bit, the case is a bit samey, probably, you know, looks a bit like a catalog case, but it's well screwed together. There's some interesting design choices. I kind of like this funky, really heavily I don't know, just those really squared off indices really do appeal to me. The watch is, as I say, a bit boring and a bit chunky, but it's fun, it was cheap, and it gave me an opportunity to experience an Australian-based microbrand. And this next batch of watches are watches I bought purely because they looked fun and were kind of playful. None of them cost more than $100 Australian, so they were all super, super cheap. The first is a 1970s Orient AA Deluxe special, lots and lots of other things, swimmer. Interesting kanji characters, interesting little push button date change, beaten aluminium or beaten steel style case. It's just a really fun watch, which for $100 puts something like a modern Timex Marlin to absolute shame. Along that lines, also a 1920s Meadow. Remember I showed you, you might have seen something that looks very similar to this in my vintage Alpina collection. I saw this and was fascinated by the similarities. So I bought it, A, because it was fun, and B, because it lets me do some comparison work. So it's, in some ways, it's also a channel watch. Lets me do some sort of comparison of how these older watches all use the same cases, often from the same case makers, but found ways to make them different anyway. Along those lines, now I've got a couple of Fortis watches. The first is a Forza Skylark, I think it is. Classic late 60s, early 70s, super squashy case. Tiny, tiny little watch, but fun and good to play with. And another Fortis, completely different, a weird kind of diver. If I look carefully, you'll see that it's actually, I think they still, you can date this because it says it's still waterproof somewhere, or uses some odd language which we wouldn't use anymore. If you do notice, it's got like 3 different movable bezels. So you've got an interior rotating bezel, the tachometer bezel can move, and a world timer bezel can move. All in all, there's just so much going on that when I saw this watch and what they're trying to achieve, it just struck me as more fun than a barrel of monkeys, and also quite a handsome piece. So, like I said, it ended up being mine. And the last of these fun pieces was a cheap and cheerful, very badly done, redialed Breitling Cadet from, I think, the late 50s. I can't remember. It is original. It is, as in, it is in fact a Breitling. If you crack it open and look at all the reference numbers, look at all the reference numbers, the movement numbers and everything lines up. It's just had a terrible redial. It's actually, the redial isn't bad in every instance bar one, which is where you look at how they did that B. That really is off-putting. But like I said, it cost me, this watch cost like about 80 Australian dollars, was a risk worth taking. And despite that redial, I actually kind of like it. So it goes in my fun bucket. Okay, so now we're getting into the last set. These are my memorabilia or sort of sentimental watches. The first is, I'll start with a heavy hitter, my dad's old watch. A run-of-the-mill, nothing particularly special, Seiko automatic from back in the 70s. I've mentioned earlier, I spent a lot of my life driving around in the front seat of my car, looking across and seeing this watch on my dad's wrist. When he passed away, this ended up with me, and I love this to pieces, and it's just a huge part of my life. Another watch is this Timex Silverstone. It's a Swiss chronograph quartz, and it was a present from my daughter, who knew I was into watches and wanted to say thank you the week she got her first ever real paycheck from a real job post-university. So she researched this, bought this for me, and it is an incredibly special watch to me. And it's one that, again, all of these watches, I'm not even going to bother say will never go anywhere. None of these watches are going anywhere. So they're all special pieces to me. The next is this, a fairly nondescript little quartz citizen dive watch from the late 80s. Actually, I can tell you when it's from. It's from 1987. This was my graduation present from my parents for when I graduated from engineering and was commissioned as an officer in the Air Force. This is a Panzera Fuga. This was the first and remains the only watch given to me by someone in order to do a sponsored video for them. So it in some ways is kind of an important marker in what I have done as a YouTuber, and hence it makes it into my specials collection. Next, I have another odd little watch, a Floss Seeger, which I think is a Latvian brand or perhaps a Soviet brand. A gift from my daughter this Christmas. Again, Mike, this is going to be a common theme. The kids know I'm into watches. They know I'm into fun things. They can't afford to buy super special stuff most of the time, so they err the other way and go fun. Hence this little Floss Seeger, which is a great way for kids, I think, to really play with us in this hobby. Okay, so now going back to something completely different, my one and only GShock. You'll notice it looks a bit weird. This watch was issued to me by the Air Force in 1990. It was the watch I wore for many, many years around aeroplanes and that work. GShocks are very robust, can really take a punch. What they're not good at, being made of resin, is dealing with chemical spills. So years of fuel, avgas, avtur and hydraulic fluid totally killed the outer shell. So I've left it kind of naked. I know you can get replacement shells, but I kind of like it like this. And it's purely a memento. So it's, what's the point? I may as well just keep it like this. And if you like, consider this as a kind of patina. Okay, coming to the end, what we have here are two Timex chronographs, both gifts, one gift from my wife, one gift to my daughter, so which automatically gets them into the specials category. They're really fun. They're not things that I would ordinarily buy for myself, but then that in one way is the beauty of people giving you watches as gifts. You end up getting things which you might not have otherwise bought for yourself, and can extend you in ways you didn't see coming. And the final two watches, two complete junk watches, which I have for one simple reason. This one was part of a memorabilia pack issued by my football club when they won a premiership in 2019. And this is a memorabilia watch from when my football club won a premiership in 2020. I am searching to see if I can get one from when they won their premiership in 2017, but it doesn't look like there was one issued. So, as I said, these are pure souvenir watches. Souvenir shop, cheap and cheerful junk watches, but as watches, they're not that important to me at all. In what they signified in my team finally breaking through and actually becoming successful, they are immensely important to me. So that's it. I promise I won't talk about my collection for another year at least. This last bunch of watches is a pretty eclectic mix. Some of these watches are really good. Some of these watches are really terrible, but they're in my collection for a reason. And yeah, they probably, I'm tossing and turning whether this last section would even be in my collection next time I do one of these videos. I'll throw that open to you. Ask you, for those watches which you have for kind of fun or memorabilia reasons, but you wouldn't necessarily hold on to and say this sort of represents who I am, would you consider those part of your collection? Or do you have the idea of you've got a collection and then other watches you own? I have ummed and ahed and tossed and turned, and I still haven't landed on an answer for that. I'm curious to know, what do you think? Do you divide your hoard into collection and other watches? Are they all part of your collection? How do you guys look at it? Anyway, I've been Pete McConville. This has been Not So Obvious Watches, and I'll see you later. Bye.